I wasn't going to post this because who'd even believe it? But after everything that went down last week, I need to get this off my chest. Fair warning, this is long and honestly still pisses me off to type out. So, rewind to when I was 14 and my brother Atlas was 8. We had what I thought was a normal middle-class family. Dad worked in sales. Mom was in real estate. We lived in this decent neighborhood in Oregon. Not fancy, but not bad either. Yeah, our parents fought a lot and were kind of distant, but I didn't realize how messed up things really were. That day started normal. Me and Atlas rode the bus home from school like always. I remember Atlas was excited because he'd made this clay pot thing in art class and wanted to show Mom. When we got off at our stop, something felt weird immediately. There was this strange car in our driveway next to Dad's truck. As we walked closer, I noticed something that didn't make sense. A sold sign was stuck in our front yard. At first, I thought it was for the neighbor's house or something. Mom worked in real estate, so sometimes she'd put signs in our yard temporarily. But then I saw Mom standing there with some dude in a suit, and she was smiling bigger than I'd seen in years. Dad was leaning against his truck, counting what looked like a stack of cash. I'll never forget the moment it clicked. Atlas ran up going, "Mom, look what I made." And she literally stepped back like she didn't want him to touch her. She looked at the guy in the suit, who I realized was a realtor, and said something about these neighborhood kids always hanging around. The realtor looked confused and was like, he just called you Mom." My dad jumped in with this dismissive laugh and told the guy, "Kids will say anything for attention." Then peeled off some bills from his stack and handed them to the realtor, saying something about "for your discretion." I was still trying to process what was happening when Atlas asked where our room was. That's when Mom finally addressed us directly, fanning herself with what I later realized were first-class plane tickets. She explained that they'd closed the sale 2 hours ago, and since I was 14 and Atlas was 8, it was time to learn independence. I thought she was joking. I literally laughed because who does that? Then Dad dropped the bomb that he'd sold all our stuff on Facebook Marketplace that morning. All of it. Even my dead grandma's jewelry box that I kept under my bed with the only pictures I had of her. They'd literally liquidated our entire existence in a single day. Mom kept going on about their child-free paradise plans. Mediterranean cruise, then Asia. Like they were finally free of some horrible burden. Us, their kids. I started yelling, asking where we were supposed to go, what we were supposed to do. Atlas was full-on crying now, clutching his stupid clay pot. Dad just tossed $2 bills on the ground and said, "Bus fare. We're not monsters." Then Mom actually blew us a kiss and told us to try not to get trafficked like it was some kind of joke. They got in separate cars, Dad in his truck, Mom in her Lexus, and just drove away. The realtor stood there looking absolutely horrified. He tried saying something about calling authorities, but then just awkwardly left, too. Later, I realized he probably thought he'd get in trouble for being part of whatever this was. Atlas was hysterical, and I was in shock. We just stood there on the lawn of what used to be our house. The new owners were moving in that day. A moving truck pulled up while we were still standing there. And this couple got out looking all excited about their new home. They seemed nice, but were obviously uncomfortable finding 2 kids crying on their new lawn. They asked if we were neighbors, and I didn't even know what to say. I grabbed Atlas and we walked to the park a few blocks away. I tried calling our parents, but both their numbers were already disconnected. That's when it hit me that this wasn't some sick joke. They had actually planned this probably for months. That night, we slept on the playground equipment. I covered Atlas with my jacket and told him everything would be okay. Even though I had no idea what we were going to do, we had the clothes on our backs, $2, and Atlas's clay pot, which broke around midnight when he rolled over in his sleep. In the morning, we went to my friend Devon's house. His mom freaked out when I explained what happened. She tried calling the police, but get this, my parents had actually filed some paperwork claiming they were sending us to live with our aunt in Idaho. They'd forged her signature and everything. So when the police checked, it looked like we were supposed to be on our way to our aunt's, not abandoned. Devon's mom called my aunt, who I'd only met like twice. My mom's older sister. She was pissed, not at my parents, but at having to deal with us. Turns out my parents had been telling the family for years that they regretted having kids, that we were destroying their lives and finances. They'd been painting this picture of being trapped and miserable because of us. My aunt reluctantly agreed to let us stay with her, but made it clear it was temporary until she figured something out. We took a Greyhound to Idaho the next day. 3 days after being abandoned, we were living with an aunt who resented us in a tiny apartment in Boise. The thing I didn't understand then was why. Like, they weren't teen parents forced into parenthood. They'd been married 3 years before having me. Dad was 28 and Mom was 26 when I was born. They chose to have Atlas years later. But according to my aunt, they'd been complaining for years about how kids ruined their dreams of traveling the world and living some fantasy lifestyle. Apparently, the final straw was when Dad's parents died in a car accident 6 months earlier. They weren't close, but Dad inherited enough money that suddenly their freedom fantasy seemed possible. They just needed to get rid of us first. So that's what they did. They erased us. And for 12 years, we didn't hear a single word from either of them. My aunt never let us forget we were burdens. Atlas developed this stutter and anxiety that took years of therapy to improve. I worked every job I could find starting at 15, lying about my age to get hired at a local restaurant washing dishes. I was determined we wouldn't be dependent on anyone who didn't want us. We saw their posts sometimes. Photos from Barcelona, Thailand, Bali, living their best child-free lives while we struggled to survive. They never checked on us, sent money, called on birthdays, nothing. It was like we never existed. Fast forward 12 years. I'm 26 now. Atlas is 20. We've built lives from nothing. I put myself through community college, working multiple jobs. Atlas is in his 2nd year at State University on scholarship. We survived. No thanks to them. Then 4 days ago, we finally executed the plan we've been working on for the past year. A plan that started when we discovered our parents had blown through their inheritance and moved back to the States, trying to rebuild their lives in California. They've been frantically calling and texting for the past 4 days. Over 30 messages, crying, threatening, begging. The tables have completely turned. And honestly, it feels fucking amazing. But that's not even the best part. The best part is they still don't understand what they did wrong. My dad's latest voicemail literally said, "After everything we sacrificed. For you boys growing up, sacrificed? They abandoned their children with $2. I'll post an update with all the details of our revenge on Once Loyal if people are interested. It took us a year to set up, but only 1 day to execute, and it was worth every second of planning." Update 1. Thanks for all the messages and support. A lot of you asked for details about what happened after we were abandoned and how we planned our revenge. So, here goes. So, my aunt's place in Boise was a 1-bedroom apartment, and she made it clear from day one that we were an unwanted burden. She set up an air mattress in the living room that Atlas and I shared. The first night there, she sat us down and told us the real story about our parents. According to her, our mom had been complaining about being a parent since I was born. She showed me old emails where Mom talked about how having kids ruined her body and destroyed her freedom. Dad apparently went along with it because he was obsessed with Mom and would do anything to keep her happy. I remember my aunt saying something that stuck with me. "Your parents didn't abandon you suddenly. They'd been mentally leaving you for years." The first few months were rough. Atlas would wake up crying almost every night. He developed this stutter that got worse whenever he was stressed, which was basically all the time. My aunt would yell at him to stop that fake stuttering for attention, which only made it worse. School was a nightmare. We started mid-semester, and I had to explain to teachers why we suddenly moved to Idaho without any school records. Most assumed we were problem kids sent to live with a relative as punishment. Some of the teachers were cool, but most just saw us as more work they didn't need. After about 3 months, my aunt started dropping hints about more permanent arrangements and looking up stuff about foster care on her laptop, which she always left open for us to see. Message received loud and clear. That's when I got my first job at 14, lying about my age to wash dishes at this local diner. The owner probably knew I wasn't 16, but didn't care as long as I worked hard. I gave my aunt money for rent, which she happily took. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep her from actively trying to get rid of us. One night about 6 months after we moved in, I was using my aunt's desktop computer to do homework when a notification popped up. It was my mom posting on Instagram. I hadn't even thought to look for them on social media before that. There they were posing on some beach in Thailand. Mom in a bikini, Dad with a stupid straw hat, both holding cocktails with those little umbrellas. The caption was something like, "Day 180 of our freedom tour. Never been happier." I showed Atlas, which was probably a mistake. He cried for hours that night. After that, I started checking their social media regularly. They posted everything. First-class plane tickets, fancy hotels, tourist attractions, and countries I had to look up on a map. All while we were sleeping on an air mattress and eating ramen. When I was 16, I got a second job stocking shelves at a grocery store. Between the two jobs, I was working about 50 hours a week while going to school. My grades tanked, but what choice did I have? Atlas needed stability. I tried reaching out to our parents once when I was 17. I created a new email account and sent them a message just asking how they were doing. No anger, no accusations, just, "Hey, it's Carter. How are you guys?" No response. I checked their social media the next day and they'd posted about toxic people from the past trying to drag them down. They didn't name us, but the timing made it pretty clear. That's when I decided to focus 100% on getting us out of there. I stopped checking their social media. I stopped caring what they were doing. I just worked and saved and tried to be there for Atlas. By the time I was 18, I had enough saved for a security deposit on a tiny studio apartment. The day we moved out, my aunt didn't even say goodbye. She just handed me a trash bag with our few belongings and said, "Don't come back." Atlas was 12 by then. His stutter was better, but still came out when he was stressed. I enrolled him in a decent middle school and worked out a schedule where I could drop him off before work and pick him up after. Things actually got a bit easier once we were on our own. No more walking on eggshells. No more aunt making snide comments about how we ate too much food. Our apartment was tiny and in a sketchy neighborhood, but it was ours. I kept working both jobs and added a third one delivering food on weekends. Atlas started helping too, walking dogs in the neighborhood, mowing lawns, anything to contribute. I hated that he felt like he needed to work at that age, but he insisted. I got my GED at 19 and started taking classes at the community college while still working. It took me 5 years to get a 2-year degree because I could only take 1 or 2 classes each semester, but I finished. Atlas did way better in school than me. He was smart as hell and worked twice as hard as his classmates. He joined every club that was free and studied constantly. By his junior year of high school, teachers were talking to him about college scholarships. The day Atlas got his first scholarship letter was probably the proudest day of my life. Full ride to the state university when he showed me. We both just sat on our crappy couch and cried. Good tears, you know. Life was finally looking up. I had a decent job. Atlas was going to college. We had our own place. I'd started dating a bit. Nothing serious, but normal stuff. We were building a life. Then last year, something weird happened. I was helping Atlas move into his dorm for freshman year when my phone dinged with a Venmo notification. Someone had sent me $50 with a message, "Happy birthday, son." It was from my dad. I hadn't even realized it was my birthday. And after 12 years of nothing, suddenly he remembers. I was stunned at first, then furious. $50 fucking dollars. After everything, I declined the payment and blocked the account, but it got me curious. I hadn't looked them up in years. So that night, I searched for them online. Turns out they'd run out of money. Their great adventure had ended about 2 years earlier when they blew through all their inheritance. According to their social media, they'd moved back to the US and were living in San Diego. Dad was trying to get back into sales and Mom was attempting to restart her real estate career. Their post had changed from exotic vacations to hustle culture shit and networking events. That's when the idea started forming. They'd abandoned us when they were on top and now they were struggling. It felt like the universe was handing us an opportunity. I showed Atlas everything I'd found. We stayed up all night talking about it. At first, he was hesitant. He'd worked hard to move past what happened, but the more we talked, the more he warmed up to the idea. We started planning, not just some petty shit like signing them up for spam emails or whatever. Something that would really make them feel what we felt. Something that would take away their security just like they'd taken away ours. The plan took shape over several months. We researched, we plotted, we prepared. Atlas was actually the mastermind behind most of it. Turns out all those years of being quiet and watching people made him pretty damn good at understanding how to get under someone's skin. We learned that our parents were trying to rebuild their reputation in San Diego. They were networking like crazy, trying to establish themselves in the local business community. Dad was attempting to start a small investment group and Mom was working with a real estate team. The final piece fell into place when we discovered they were organizing a business mixer to attract potential investors and clients. It was scheduled for last week at some hotel downtown. That's when we knew it was time. We drove down to San Diego, checked into a cheap motel, and got ready for the main event. What happened next? Well, it's hard to even type it all out. Let's just say we showed up at their event, and they didn't recognize us at first. Why would they? In their minds, we were still kids. But we're not kids anymore. The look on their face is when they finally realized who we were. I'll never forget it as long as I live. But this is getting long, and the really juicy part deserves its own update. I'll post the details of the actual revenge on Once Loyal tomorrow. Trust me, it's worth the wait. These past 4 days of their panic have been the most satisfying of my life. Update 2. Okay, so you guys wanted details on our plan. First, thanks for all the supportive comments. I've been reading them to Atlas, and we both appreciate it. Some of you guys are more vindictive than we are, which is saying something. After we discovered our parents were back in the US and struggling financially, Atlas and I spent like 2 weeks just digging up everything we could find about them. We didn't want to half-ass this. We wanted to really understand what they were doing and how to hit them where it would hurt the most. Social media was a goldmine. Dad had created this whole fake persona as a self-made entrepreneur and investment guru. The kind of guy who posts motivational quotes with pictures of himself in a suit. Mom was doing the typical real estate thing, posting glamour shots next to sold signs and talking about helping families find their forever homes. The irony is just Atlas found their business website, which was basically a landing page for Dad's new investment group that was supposedly helping small businesses get funding. The site was full of stock photos and buzzwords, but light on actual details about what they did. Classic Dad, all talk, no substance. We joined some San Diego Facebook groups and started asking subtle questions about local business events. Someone mentioned this mixer our parents were organizing at the Marina Hotel. It was supposed to be this fancy networking thing for elite business leaders. $500 a ticket. When we saw that, we both had the same thought. They're desperate for money and trying to look successful to attract investors. That's when Atlas suggested our approach. Instead of just showing up and confronting them, which would be satisfying but short-lived, we could actually infiltrate their business world, become the investors they were desperately seeking, get them to pin their hopes on us, then pull the rug out, just like they did to us. So, we started building our fake identities. Atlas created a LinkedIn profile for me as Carter Mitchell, using my first name, but a different last name, and positioned me as a venture scout for a bigger investment firm. We borrowed a friend's suit for profile pictures, and Atlas photoshopped me into some conference backgrounds. We kept it vague enough to be believable, but impressive enough to catch attention. We also needed someone on the inside to validate us. That's where my girlfriend Becky came in. She wasn't originally part of the plan, but when I told her what we were doing, she was all in. Her exact words were, "Those fucking monsters deserve whatever's coming." She has a cousin in San Diego who works in event planning, and through her, Becky got info about other attendees and the venue setup. About 3 weeks before the event, I sent an email to the contact on their website, expressing interest in attending as a potential investor. I mentioned I was looking for opportunities in the San Diego area and had heard about their group through a mutual connection, intentionally vague. The response came within minutes. Dad himself replied super enthusiastic, offering to comp my ticket and even suggesting a private meeting before the main event. He was so eager it was almost sad. Reading his emails, you'd think I was some billionaire ready to hand over a blank check. I strung him along asking questions about their business model, their current investors, projected returns, all the stuff a real investor would ask. Each time his answers got more elaborate and the projected returns got higher. Classic pyramid scheme vibes. 2 weeks before the event, I accidentally mentioned I could potentially bring $250,000 of initial investment if the right opportunity presented itself. That's when Mom joined the email chain, suggesting they could give me a VIP tour of some properties they were developing. These people who abandoned their kids with $2 were now practically begging for my attention because they thought I had money. Meanwhile, Atlas was doing reconnaissance. He found their address through property records. They were renting, not owning, another sign they were broke, and drove by a few times to get a feel for their routine. He discovered Dad drove a leased BMW that was 2 months behind on payments. The repo notice was visible on the dashboard when he peeked in sloppy. Mom was driving a 10-year-old Lexus, the same one she left in the day they abandoned us. Atlas also found their favorite coffee shop by following Mom one morning. He sat a few tables away and just observed. She spent the whole time on her phone taking selfies that made it look like she was in business meetings. At one point, she even staged a fake phone call talking loudly about $1 million listing while the barista rolled his eyes behind her back. The week of the event, I confirmed our attendance, myself, and my financial advisor, Atlas. Dad sent over a schedule that included a private dinner the night before with select premium investors. The desperation was palpable. We drove down to San Diego 2 days early to prepare. Becky came with us for moral support and to help with last-minute details. We checked into this cheap motel about 20 minutes from the venue. That night, we went over our plan again, making sure we had all our facts straight and our story consistent. The day before the big event, we did a dry run. Drove to the hotel, checked out the ballroom where the mixer would be held, timed how long it would take to get from our motel to the venue. Atlas was nervous. His stutter tends to come back when he's stressed, and we knew that could blow our cover. We practiced some breathing exercises his therapist had taught him. That night, I had trouble sleeping. Part of me still couldn't believe we were actually doing this. After 12 years of trying to move forward, we were deliberately stepping back into their lives. But every time I considered backing out, I remembered Atlas crying on that playground the first night after they abandoned us. I remembered working until my hands bled at 16, just so we could eat, and any doubt vanished. The day of the event arrived. We got dressed in the suits we'd bought at a thrift store and had tailored. Not cheap, but worth it to look the part. Becky helped fix our ties and took pictures for evidence, as she put it. There was this moment when Atlas and I looked at each other in the mirror, all dressed up, and it hit me how far we'd come from those abandoned kids. We arrived at the hotel 30 minutes early for our private meeting with Dad. The plan was for me to go in first with Atlas joining later as my advisor. I spotted Dad immediately in the hotel lobby. Older, grayer, but unmistakably him. He was pacing nervously, checking his watch every few seconds. I walked up and introduced myself as Carter Mitchell. He shook my hand enthusiastically, not showing any sign of recognition. Why would he? In his mind, his son was still a teenager, not a suited adult. We sat down in the lobby bar, and he launched into his pitch about his investment group and their proprietary model for identifying undervalued opportunities. I asked pointed questions, the kind that would make any legitimate businessman uncomfortable. Where was their audited track record? Who were their current investors? What was their management fee structure? With each question, he got more flustered, making up answers on the spot or deflecting with vague industry jargon. After about 20 minutes, I texted Atlas to join us. He walked in confidently, introduced himself as my financial advisor, and sat down. Dad shook his hand without a second glance. We were just potential money to him, not people. Certainly not his children. Mom arrived about 10 minutes later. She was dressed expensively, but everything looked a bit dated, like she was wearing her last good outfit from the good days. She kissed Dad on the cheek and turned to us with this practiced real estate agent smile. She extended her hand to me and said she was thrilled to meet someone of my caliber. The four of us moved to a private dining room for dinner. Throughout the meal, they pitched their business model, which was basically getting investors to fund property developments, skimming fees off the top and promising unrealistic returns. It was barely legal and clearly desperate. I mentioned casually that I had grown up in Oregon, watching for any reaction. Mom just nodded politely and said Oregon was charming, but she preferred more cosmopolitan environments, not a flicker of connection. Atlas asked about their family, whether they had children who would eventually join the business. Dad laughed uncomfortably and said they had chosen the child-free lifestyle to focus on their passions. Mom jumped in to add that children weren't compatible with their vision. They had completely erased us from their narrative. Throughout dinner, Atlas was recording everything on his phone in his pocket. Not just for the revenge, but for our own validation, proof that we weren't crazy, that they really were these callous people who could sit across from their own sons and not recognize them. After dinner, we moved to the main event, the mixer in the hotel ballroom. About 50 people were there, mostly older couples, trying to look wealthy and important. Dad introduced me to everyone as a major potential investor, and people flocked around us like we were celebrities. That's when we implemented phase 2 of our plan. I started mentioning to people that I was particularly interested in their group because of their family values and integrity. I asked other attendees if they'd had good experiences with the couple, if they seemed trustworthy, just planting seeds of doubt. Meanwhile, Atlas was doing the same on the other side of the room, subtly questioning their business model and hinting that he'd heard concerning things about their past ventures. Nothing specific, just enough to make people uncomfortable. As the night went on, I could see Dad getting more desperate for commitment. He pulled me aside and offered me founder status if I invested that night, a special rate not available to others. I told him I was definitely interested, but needed to see some documentation first, specifically their background and history. That's when he started getting personal, sharing his life story, a completely fabricated version where he and Mom had built everything from scratch through hard work and determination. No mention of inheritance money. No mention of abandoning 2 kids. According to him, they'd had some setbacks during the recession, but were now poised for a comeback. I nodded sympathetically and said I admired people who were honest about their past. I mentioned that I always did thorough background checks before investing. Standard procedure. His face twitched slightly. By the end of the night, they were practically salivating at the prospect of my investment. Dad had moved from offering founder status to suggesting I could be a partner in the business. Mom had invited me to tour properties the next day. They gave me a folder full of glossy brochures and projections showing how my $250,000 could turn into millions within years. As we were leaving, I told them I'd be in touch tomorrow with my decision. Dad actually hugged me. Mom kissed my cheek and called me like the son we never had. That was the moment, the perfect setup for what would come next. Atlas and I got back to our motel, still in shock at how they hadn't recognized us at all. Not our faces, not our names, not even our voices. We were truly nothing to them. We stayed up late finalizing the last details of our plan. The next day would be the real revenge. The part where we'd reveal ourselves and watch their fake world collapse. What we didn't expect was that they'd call me at 7 a.m. the next morning, inviting us to breakfast to finalize the details. They couldn't even wait a few hours. The desperation was real, and that's when we knew we had them exactly where we wanted them. Next update on Once Loyal, the final confrontation and aftermath. It's a lot to type out, but trust me, it was worth every second of planning. Final update. So, this is it. The finale you've all been waiting for. Thanks for writing this out with me on Once Loyal. Writing all this has been weirdly therapeutic. We met our parents for breakfast at this fancy hotel restaurant at 8 a.m. Dad looked like he hadn't slept at all. His eyes were all bloodshot, and he kept fidgeting with his napkin. Mom was trying really hard to look put together, but her makeup was kind of caked on like she'd applied it in a hurry. We'd agreed on a signal. Beforehand. I tapped my water glass twice when it was time to start. Atlas was nervous as hell, but holding it together. Becky was waiting in the hotel lobby as our backup. She had our overnight bags packed in the car in case things went sideways. Dad started off by sliding a folder across the table with a bunch of paperwork, investment agreements, partnership documents, all that shit. He'd already filled in my fake name and was pointing at the signature line, talking about how we could finalize everything right now. And he'd take me to the bank immediately after breakfast. Mom kept cutting in to talk about how excited she was to welcome me to the family and how I reminded her of someone, but she couldn't quite place it. The irony was so thick I could barely keep a straight face. I asked some more questions about their background, pretending to do last-minute due diligence. Had they always been in business together? Any children or dependents I should know about? Any past legal issues? Dad got this weird tight smile and said they'd always prioritized their professional aspirations over traditional family structures, like having kids was some kind of exotic lifestyle choice. Mom nodded along and added that they'd made certain sacrifices for success. That's when I tapped my glass twice. Atlas pulled out his phone and placed it on the table, then pulled up a photo. It was the last school picture we'd taken before they abandoned us. He turned it around to face them. For a second, there was just confusion on their faces. Then this slow dawning recognition. Mom's eyes got huge. Dad stopped mid-sentence about investment potential. I leaned forward and said, "So, about those sacrifices for success? Would those include selling your house while your kids were at school and abandoning them with $2 in bus fare?" Dad recovered first, lowering his voice and asking what kind of scam we were trying to pull. Mom was frantically looking around the restaurant like she was afraid someone might overhear. Atlas spoke up then, which was huge because he was terrified his stutter would come back. He said, "You told me to try not to get trafficked, Mom. Right before you drove away in your Lexus, remember?" The color drained from her face. Dad tried to stand up, but I put my hand on his arm and told him he might want to hear us out first. I mentioned that several people from last night's event were having breakfast in the same restaurant, including potential investors, and they probably wouldn't appreciate hearing how the hosts had abandoned their children. That got him back in his seat real quick. What followed was the most surreal 20 minutes of my life. First, they tried denial, claiming, we must be confused or making it up. Then came anger. How dare we show up and threaten their reputation? Then bargaining. Maybe we could discuss this privately. Surely, we could come to some arrangement. The whole time, Atlas was calmly recording everything on his phone. Not secretly, right out in the open. Every pathetic excuse, every desperate attempt to shut us up. I pulled out a manila envelope and placed it on the table. Inside was evidence we'd compiled, the original deed to our house in Oregon with their signatures on the sale documents dated the day they left us, photos of us as kids with them, and statements from our aunt confirming they'd abandoned us. Then I pulled out the agreement they just handed me and pointed to where it mentioned full disclosure of any potential liabilities or conflicts. I explained that abandoning minor children probably counted as a liability and falsifying documents to make it look like we were going to our aunt's was definitely fraud. Dad grabbed the investment agreement and tried to rip it up, but I just laughed and told him I had digital copies of everything from the folder which Atlas had photographed while they were distracted. That's when Mom started crying, but not like sad crying, angry crying. She hissed that we had no right to come back after all these years and ruin what they'd built. That we'd always been ungrateful and difficult children who never appreciated their sacrifices. I lost it at that point. I wasn't planning to, but hearing her talk about sacrifices after what they did, I stood up and asked her exactly what sacrifices she'd made. Was it a sacrifice to sell the jewelry box my dead grandmother gave me? Was it a sacrifice to tell an 8-year-old boy to try not to get trafficked before driving away forever? People were definitely staring now. Dad tried to grab my arm to pull me back into my seat, but I yanked it away. Atlas stood up, too, and started listing off all the things we'd gone through, sleeping on a playground, working at 14. Our aunt's resentment, him developing a stutter from the trauma. Mom was frantically trying to quiet us down, saying people were listening. Dad was attempting to salvage the situation, telling nearby tables we were disturbed individuals making false claims. That's when this older couple from the event last night came over. The woman asked if everything was okay, looking genuinely concerned. Dad tried to play it off, But Atlas, in the most steady voice I've ever heard from him, told them we were his parents' abandoned children who they just failed to recognize after 12 years. The look of disgust on that woman's face was something I'll never forget. She and her husband just walked out without another word. 2 other couples followed them. Dad looked like he was going to have a stroke. He stood up and accused us of destroying their business prospects. I reminded him that we hadn't forced them to abandon their children or lie about it afterward. Those were choices they made all on their own. Mom started damage control, trying to call after the leaving couples, but it was too late. The word was spreading around the restaurant. People were staring and whispering. That's when I delivered the final blow. I told them we'd reached out to every person on their investor list, which we'd gotten from Dad's laptop bag when he went to the bathroom the night before, careless with his passwords as always. We'd sent emails early that morning detailing our story with evidence attached. Mom actually slapped me across the face hard. A waiter who'd been watching the whole thing immediately came over and told her the police would be called if there was any more physical aggression. Dad looked defeated. He asked what we wanted, money to ruin them completely. What would make us go away? I told them we didn't want their money. We'd survived and built lives without them. What we wanted was for them to live with the consequences of their actions, just like we'd had to. For them to feel what it's like to have everything suddenly taken away. We got up to leave. Mom grabbed Atlas's arm and started saying he'd always been her special boy and she'd missed him every day. Complete bullshit since she hadn't recognized him yesterday. Atlas just looked at her hand until she let go. He didn't say a word to her. As we walked out, Dad followed us, begging us to take down the emails, saying we were destroying their lives over one mistake. I stopped and told him it wasn't one mistake. It was a choice they made and reinforced every day for 12 years by not trying to find us, not sending money, not checking if we were even alive. We left them standing in the hotel lobby as people from the mixer walked past, giving them disgusted looks. Several people approached us outside asking if we were okay and saying they'd had no idea about our parents' past. We drove back to our motel, picked up Becky, and headed home. The revenge was done. We'd exposed them publicly, tanked their business prospects, and made sure everyone in their new social circle knew exactly who they were. The messages started about 2 hours later. First text saying they were sorry, that they'd made a horrible mistake, that they wanted to make it right, then calls that we didn't answer, then voicemails, first apologetic, then angry, then desperate. Mom texted that they were being evicted because the landlord had been at the hotel and heard everything. Dad left a voicemail saying all their potential investors had pulled out and they were being asked to return deposits they'd already spent. The last 4 days have been a constant stream of messages. Over 30 at last count. The tone keeps shifting between blaming us for overreacting to begging for money to threatening to sue us for defamation. Good luck with that when everything we said was true. Last night, Dad left a message saying they were sleeping in their car because they couldn't make rent and had nowhere to go. Mom sent a picture of them looking disheveled in what was clearly the backseat of her old Lexus. I'll be honest, there was a moment when I felt a twinge of something. Not guilt exactly, but a weird sense of coming full circle. They abandoned us with nothing, and now they had nothing. But then I remembered Atlas crying himself to sleep for months. I remembered working until my hands bled while other kids were going to parties. I remembered every birthday and Christmas alone. I sent them one final text this morning. Here's $2 for bus fare. We're not monsters. Then I blocked their numbers. Atlas and I are back home now. He's focusing on his classes and I'm trying to process everything that happened. Becky says she's proud of us for standing up for ourselves. I don't know if I feel better exactly. Revenge doesn't heal old wounds, but there's something powerful about finally being seen. About them finally having to acknowledge what they did and face consequences for it. For 12 years, they got to pretend we never existed. Now, everyone knows exactly who they are and what they did. And we get to move forward knowing we're not the ones who should be ashamed. They are.